The history of the United States flag. Introduction. A symbol born from revolution. The flag of the United States of America stands as one of the most recognizable symbols on the planet. A banner that has flown over battlefields and peaceful protests, been planted on the moon, and draped over the coffins of heroes. Yet its familiar modern appearance, 13 alternating red and white stripes, topped by a blue canton containing 50 white stars, is the culmination of more than 240 years of evolution, shaped by military conflicts, territorial expansion, political compromises, congressional acts, and the passionate debates of generations of Americans who sought to define what their nation should represent. This is not simply the story of a piece of cloth. It is the story of America itself, of revolution and independence, of westward expansion and manifest destiny, of civil war and reunion, of world wars and global leadership. The flag has been a witness to every triumph and tragedy in American history, and its very design has changed to reflect the nation's growth from 13 struggling colonies clinging to the Atlantic seaboard to 50 states spanning a continent and beyond. The flag has officially changed 27 times. Since its inception, with the most recent version adopted in 1960, following Hawaii's admission to the Union. Yet each of these changes tells a story of new territories admitted, of political debates over slavery and statehood, of a growing nation's ambitions and contradictions. Some versions of the flag flew for decades, becoming indelibly associated with particular eras of American history. Others lasted mere months, transitional symbols in a nation perpetually reinventing itself. To understand the American flag is to understand America, its ideals and its failures, its unity and its divisions, its evolution from a radical experiment in Republican government to a global superpower. This is that story, told in full detail with dates, events, personalities, and the fascinating minutiae that bring history to life. Prehistory, colonial flags and the symbols of subjugation, 1607–1775. The British heritage, flying the King's colours in a new world. Long before any distinctly American flag existed, the territories that would become the United States flew the banners of their colonial overlords. For over 150 years, from the founding of Jamestown in 1607 through the outbreak of revolution in 1775, British flags dominated the American landscape symbols of imperial authority, commercial enterprise, and the complex relationship between colonists and crown. 1. The Red Ensign, Commerce and Colonial Identity, 1620s–1775. The most commonly seen British flag in colonial America was the Red Ensign, also called the Colonial Red Ensign, or Meteor flag, which served as the merchant and colonial flag of the British Empire. This flag featured the Union Jack in the canton. Upper left corner. After 1707, this combined the crosses of St. George, England, and St. Andrew, Scotland. A red field, covering the rest of the flag. Occasionally, colonial badges caught in the fly, right side, identifying specific colonies. The red ensign was ubiquitous in colonial America. On ships, every colonial merchant vessel flew the red ensign as its ensign. British naval vessels escorting colonial trade used it. Fishing boats from New England to Georgia displayed it. Privateers during King George's War, 1744–1748, and the French and Indian War, 1754–1763, sailed under it. On land, colonial governors' residences flew it, port facilities and customs houses displayed it. Military installations used it alongside regimental colors. Some colonial legislatures flew it from their meeting places. The red ensign represented commercial identity more than political allegiance. It signified participation in the British trading system, with all its protections and restrictions. Colonial merchants could trade throughout the empire under its protection, but were also bound by the Navigation Acts that required them to use British ships and trade through British ports. The Union Jack, symbol of imperial unity, 1707–1775. The Union Jack, officially the Union flag, though Union Jack was commonly used, became Britain's national flag after the 1707 Acts of Union merged England and Scotland into the Kingdom of Great Britain. The flag combined the Red Cross of St. George, patron saint of England on white background, the white saltire, diagonal cross of St. Andrew, patron saint of Scotland, on blue background. These were superimposed to create the distinctive Union Jack design. In colonial America, the Union Jack was less commonly seen than the red ensign, but held greater symbolic weight. Official usage. Royal governors flew it from their residences as a symbol of royal authority. British regular army regiments carried it as one of their colours. British naval warships flew it as a jack, hence the name, from the bow. On royal birthdays and other official celebrations, it was displayed throughout colonial cities. Symbolic meaning. The Union Jack represented direct connection to the Crown. It symbolized British constitutional government and the rights of Englishmen. It was associated with military power and imperial protection. Its presence marked official government buildings and functions. Interestingly, many American colonists initially viewed the Union Jack positively. It represented their identity as British subjects entitled to British liberties. During the French and Indian War, 1754–1763, colonial militias fought under it alongside British regulars, considering themselves defenders of British interests against French and Native American enemies. 3. Colonial and provincial flags, local identity in a British world, 1620s–1775. Individual colonies developed their own distinctive flags and seals, though always within the framework of British authority. Massachusetts Bay Colony Flag, 1636–1686. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, founded by Puritan separatists seeking religious freedom, created one of America's first distinctive colonial flags. Design. White field with the red. Cross of St. George to win the canton. Addition. A green pine tree in the field, added by 1665. Symbolism. The cross of St. George acknowledged British sovereignty. The pine tree represented New England. Pine trees were valuable for shipmasts. The white field symbolized Puritan purity and religious mission. This flag became controversial in 1634, when Salem militiaman John Endicott cut the cross out of the British flag, arguing that the cross was a papist symbol. This act caused a crisis in the colony. Was Endicott's religious scruple legitimate Puritan principle, or seditious rejection of royal authority? The colony eventually resolved the crisis by allowing the defaced flags to be quietly replaced, but the incident foreshadowed later conflicts between colonial identity and imperial authority. The New England Flag, 1686–1707. After the brief and unpopular Dominion of New England, 1686–1689, a unified government imposed by King James II, several New England colonies used a common flag. Design. Red field with white canton containing St. George's Cross. Addition. Pine tree in the first quarter, canton, sometimes with an appeal to heaven motto. Usage. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island used variations. Pennsylvania provincial flag, 1682-1776. William Penn's Quaker colony developed its own symbolic imagery. Design. Various designs existed, but commonly featured. Penn family coat of arms, Quaker symbols of peace. Occasionally, images representing prosperity and tolerance. South Carolina provincial flag, various designs, 1670s, 1705. South Carolina, with its wealthy plantation economy and commercial orientation, used several flags. Merchant vessels used variations of the red ensign. The colony eventually developed the distinctive R-crescent and palmetto imagery that would appear on its revolutionary and state flags. These symbols represented the colony's victory against British naval forces in 1776. Ironically, a defensive victory against the empire they were leaving. Virginia provincial flags, 1607-1775. As Britain's oldest and most populous colony, Virginia used various flags. Colonial seal showing a figure of virtue, defeating tyranny. Tobacco plant imagery, the colony's economic foundation. Various versions of British flags with Virginia identifiers, l'aro. The transformation of symbolism, from loyalty to resistance, 1765-1775. The crucial decade from 1765 to 1775 saw colonial flags transform from symbols of British identity into symbols of resistance and eventually rebellion. Several key moments marked this transition. The Stamp Act crisis, 1765-1766. When Parliament passed the Stamp Act in March 1765, requiring colonists to pay taxes on printed materials, colonial resistance coalesced around the newly formed Sons of Liberty. Semi-clandestine organizations of merchants, artisans, and radicals who orchestrated protests, intimidated tax collectors, and began developing distinctly American symbolism. The Sons of Liberty flag, 1767. The Sons of Liberty developed their own flag, one of the first deliberately American flags. Design. 9 vertical red and white stripes. Symbolism. The 9 stripes represented the 9 colonies that initially protested the Stamp Act at the Stamp Act Congress, 1765. Usage. Flown at Sons of Liberty meetings and rallies, displayed during protests and demonstrations, used as a symbol of intercolonial cooperation against British taxation. Why vertical stripes rather than horizontal? This distinguished it from the British red ensign's single red field and created a unique American design. The alternating red and white stripes would become the most enduring element of American flag design, persisting through every subsequent version to the present day. The Liberty Tree flags, 1765-1775. Throughout the colonies, Liberty trees became focal points for protest, usually large, prominent trees, where the Sons of Liberty would gather, hang effigies of tax collectors, and display their flags. These flags often featured pine trees in New England, elm trees in other colonies, the phrase, "an appeal to heaven," or Liberty Tree, sometimes the words, "the Sons of Liberty." The most famous Liberty Tree stood in Boston's Hanover Square, a massive elm where colonists gathered for protests until British soldiers cut it down in 1775, an act that further inflamed revolutionary sentiment. The Townshend Acts and Escalating Resistance, 1767-1770. As British taxation efforts continued with the Townshend Acts, 1767, colonial resistance intensified, and flags became increasingly important as rallying symbols. Come to the fold. Flag, 1774. One remarkable flag from this period featured 13 red and white stripes, the image of a shepherd with sheep, the motto, "Come to the fold." Symbolism. The shepherd represented colonial unity, the sheep the individual colonies, and the fold was United Resistance Gadsden flag, 1775. Perhaps the most famous revolutionary flag was the Gadsden flag, designed by South Carolina delegate Christopher Gadsden and presented to the Continental Congress in 1775. Design: bright yellow field with coiled rattlesnake. Motto: "Don't tread on me. Sometimes don't tread on me." Symbolism: the rattlesnake represented American identity indigenous to America, peaceful when unprovoked, but deadly when threatened. Benjamin Franklin had earlier, 1751, used the rattlesnake as an American symbol in his Join or Die cartoon. The coiled position indicated readiness to strike. Yellow background was highly visible and distinctive. Historical impact: the Gadsden flag became an icon of American resistance. The Continental Navy adopted it for its vessels. It has experienced renewed popularity in modern American political movements. It's flown today by libertarians, military units, and those emphasizing early American revolutionary principles. Pine Tree Flag, 1775. The Pine Tree Flag, also called an Appeal to Heaven flag, featured: design: white field with green pine tree. Motto: an appeal to heaven across the top. Historical context: an appeal to heaven came from philosopher John Locke's second treatise on government, arguing that when earthly justice fails, one must appeal to divine justice. The flag was flown by colonial vessels operating in New England waters. It became particularly associated with Massachusetts naval vessels. Philosophical foundation: this flag encapsulated revolutionary political philosophy. Locke had argued that when a government violated the social contract and oppressed its people, they had the right indeed, the duty to resist and even overthrow it. By invoking an appeal to heaven, the colonists were claiming divine sanction for their resistance, arguing that British violations of their rights justified rebellion as both politically legitimate and religiously righteous. The First Continental Congress, September-October 1774. When delegates from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia in September 1774, Georgia didn't send delegates. They began coordinating colonial resistance. While they didn't adopt an official flag, the Congress's mere existence represented American unity and implied the need for American symbols distinct from British ones. The Congress's decisions revealed the colonists' contradictory position. They still professed loyalty to King George III. They claimed rights as British subjects, yet they coordinated resistance to Parliament and Crown policies. They established committees of correspondence, creating de facto government structures parallel to British authority. This ambiguous position, simultaneously loyal subjects and organized resistors, was reflected in flag usage. Colonists still flew British flags, but increasingly added American symbols: pine trees, rattlesnakes, liberty poles, and distinctly American mottos. Before the outbreak of war, Lexington, Concord, and the need for American symbols, April 1775. The outbreak of armed conflict at Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775, transformed the symbolic landscape. Before April 19th, flags were primarily British, with American additions or modifications. Colonial identity existed within British imperial framework. Resistance was justified as defending traditional British rights. After April 19th, armed conflict made the breach more serious. American forces needed distinctive identifiers. Flags became military necessities. not just political symbols. The question arose, what flag should American forces fly? The Bedford Minuteman flag, 1775. The Bedford, Massachusetts Minuteman Company carried one of the earliest military flags into battle. Design: red field with Latin motto Vince aut Moria, conquer or die. Addition: arm emerging from clouds, grasping sword. Historical significance: this flag was present at the Battle of Concord and is believed to be the oldest surviving American military flag. Culpeper Minutemen flag, 1775. From Culpeper County, Virginia, Minutemen carried a flag featuring design: white field with coiled rattlesnake. Motto: liberty or death, and don't tread on me. Addition: the Culpeper Minutemen, identifying the unit, the crisis of identity. By summer 1775, American forces besieging Boston faced an identity crisis. They were fighting British troops, but they hadn't declared independence. Most still hoped for reconciliation, yet they needed military flags and standards. This crisis would lead to the creation of the Grand Union flag, America's first national flag, and a perfect symbol of the colonists' contradictory position in 1775-1776. 2. The Grand Union flag, symbol of rebellion and reluctant revolution, 1775-1777. The birth of America's first national flag, December 1775. On December 3, 1775, something unprecedented occurred in human history. A collection of British colonies, still officially under the Crown, raised a distinctive flag that simultaneously proclaimed their unity, asserted their autonomy, and acknowledged their British heritage all, while fighting a war against British forces. This flag, known variously as the Grand Union flag, Continental colors, Congress flag, or the First Navy ensign, represented the complex political reality of 1775. American colonists who were revolutionaries against Parliament, but not yet rebels against the King. The design: the Grand Union flag combined elements that told the story of American identity in this transitional moment. 13 horizontal stripes, alternating red and white, representing the 13 colonies acting in union. The British Union Jack in the canton. Upper left corner, representing continued connection to Britain and loyalty to the Crown. Proportions: similar to the British Red Ensign, but distinctly modified by the addition of stripes. The symbolism: every element of this flag carried meaning. The 13 stripes. Each stripe represented one of the 13 colonies. 1. Massachusetts. 2. New Hampshire. 3. Rhode Island. 4. Connecticut. 5. New York. 6. New Jersey. 7. Pennsylvania. 8. Delaware. 9. Maryland. 10. Virginia. 11. North Carolina. 12. South Carolina. Then 13. Georgia. The stripes' equality, all the same width, symbolized that all colonies were equal partners in the Union, regardless of size, wealth, or population. The alternating colors created visual unity. Distinct colonies blending into a single harmonious design. Red and white had traditional associations. Red with valor and hardiness, white with purity and innocence. The Union Jack indicated that colonists still considered themselves British subjects, represented their claim to the traditional rights of Englishmen, showed they were fighting against Parliament's unconstitutional actions, not against the British Constitution itself, demonstrated they sought reconciliation and restoration of rights, not independence. This combination created a flag that was revolutionary yet conservative. It proclaimed American unity while acknowledging British sovereignty, asserted colonial rights while claiming British identity. The first raising, a symbolic moment in Cambridge, January 1st, 1776. The Grand Union flag's first official raising became one of the most symbolic moments in American history, though its significance was partly accidental and partly misunderstood. The date, January 1st, 1776. The place, Prospect Hill, Cambridge, Massachusetts, overlooking British-occupied Boston. The context. General George Washington had taken command of the Continental Army besieging Boston in July 1775. By January 1776, the siege had settled into a tense stalemate. American forces controlled the hills surrounding Boston. British forces held the city but were effectively trapped. Both sides fortified positions and skirmished occasionally. The Americans were transforming from a mob of militia into a Continental Army. On January 1st, 1776, the Continental Army officially reorganized. Soldiers whose enlistments had expired in December 1775 either re-enlisted or went home, to be replaced by new recruits under longer-term enlistments. This reorganization was crucial. It transformed a temporary emergency force into something approaching a professional army. Washington decided to mark this reorganization with a ceremony, and as part of that ceremony, he ordered the raising of the great Union flag, as he called it, over his headquarters at Prospect Hill. The ceremony. The flag raising on January 1st, 1776, was meant to accomplish several purposes. For American morale, signal the Continental Army's continued existence and commitment, show unity and organization, demonstrate that the Army was a permanent institution, not a temporary uprising, boost soldier morale as they began a new year of service. For British forces, show American determination and unity, demonstrate that American forces were organized under unified command, signal that American resistance would continue. For the American public, provide a visible symbol of American unity, show that the Continental Congress and Continental Army were functioning, create a rallying point for American resistance. The misunderstanding. What happened next created one of history's great ironies. On the very day Washington raised the Grand Union flag, copies of King George III's speech to Parliament from October 27, 1775, reached Cambridge. In that speech, the king had declared the American colonies to be in open rebellion and stated his intention to use military force to suppress the insurrection. British forces in Boston, seeing the new flag raised over American lines, interpreted it as a response to the king's speech, and specifically as a gesture of submission and reconciliation. Why? Because the flag contained the Union Jack. From the British perspective, the Americans were acknowledging British sovereignty by flying the British flag, perhaps signaling a willingness to negotiate. Washington was horrified when he learned of this interpretation. He wrote, "We had hoisted the Union flag in compliment to the United Colonies, but behold, it was received in Boston as a token of the deep impression the speech had made upon us, and as a signal of submission. By this time, I presume, they begin to think it strange that we have not made a formal surrender of our lines." This misunderstanding perfectly illustrated the ambiguous political situation. The Grand Union flag tried to express American unity while maintaining British connection. But by January 1776, that position was becoming untenable. You couldn't simultaneously fly the British flag and fight British soldiers without creating confusion about your intentions and identity. Military usage, The Grand Union flag in the Continental Army and Navy, 1775–1777. Despite the confusion at Cambridge, the Grand Union flag became the de facto flag of American forces for the next 18 months. Continental Army use. The Continental Army flew the Grand Union flag at headquarters. Washington's various headquarters displayed it. Fortifications. American forts and defensive positions flew it. Camps. Regimental camps used it to mark American-controlled territory. Ceremonies. It was raised during formal occasions and celebrations. However, usage was inconsistent. The Continental Army was still developing unified standards, and individual regiments often preferred their own distinctive colors. Massachusetts regiments often used pine tree flags. Virginia regiments used variations featuring the Virginia motto, Sic Semper Tyrannis. South Carolina units used palmetto tree designs. Some units continued using older colonial flags. Continental Navy use. The Continental Navy, established by Congress in October 1775, needed a distinctive ensign for its warships. The Grand Union flag served this purpose. Historical precedent. Naval vessels needed ensigns, flags, to identify their nationality. In the age of sail, encountering an unidentified ship at sea was dangerous. You needed to know if it was friend or foe, and you needed to identify yourself to avoid being attacked by allies or to properly declare your belligerent status to enemies. First official naval use. On December 3, 1775, Lieutenant John Paul Jones raised the Grand Union flag aboard the USS Alfred, the Continental Navy's first flagship, in Philadelphia. This is generally considered the flag's first official military use. Jones, who would become America's greatest naval hero during the Revolution, later wrote about the significance. I hoisted with my own hands the flag of freedom the first time it was displayed on board the Alfred on the Delaware. Naval operations under the Grand Union flag. From December 1775 through mid-1777, Continental Navy vessels flew the Grand Union flag during commerce raiding, attacking British merchant vessels, naval battles, engaging British warships, port visits, identifying themselves in foreign ports, diplomatic missions, representing American interests abroad. The flag served its purpose. It was distinctively American. The stripes made it instantly recognizable as non-British, while the Union Jack in the canton sometimes caused useful confusion, allowing American vessels to approach British ships before revealing their true identity. Political significance. The flag as symbol of colonial unity, 1775–1776. Beyond military use, the Grand Union flag served important political functions. Symbol of congressional authority. The Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, needed symbols of its authority and legitimacy. The Grand Union flag served this purpose. It represented Congress's claim to speak for all 13 colonies. It symbolized the Union Congress was trying to maintain and strengthen. It provided a visual representation of united colonial resistance. Tool of diplomacy. As Americans began seeking foreign support, particularly from France, Britain's traditional enemy, they needed symbols of their unity and determination. The Grand Union flag served this purpose in early diplomatic contacts. Propaganda value. The flag was reproduced in newspapers, pamphlets, and broadsides, helping to create a sense of American identity and unity that was crucial for sustaining the war effort. The growing inadequacy. Why the Grand Union flag had to change is 1776–1777. Despite its utility, the Grand Union flag became increasingly problematic. 1. The Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776, when Congress declared independence, the Grand Union flag became philosophically incoherent. How could independent states claim to be united while flying the flag of the power they had just declared independence from? The Union Jack in the canton now represented not heritage, but the enemy. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published January 1776, had powerfully argued for complete independence and rejection of monarchy. He wrote, "Everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'Tis time to part." After July 4th, 1776, continuing to fly a flag containing the British Union, Jack seemed to contradict the very independence Americans had declared. 2. Foreign relations. Americans were seeking French support, offering alliance and trade relations. But approaching France while flying a flag that contained the British Union, Jack sent confused messages. Were Americans truly independent, or were they British rebels seeking to restore their position within the empire? 3. Military clarity. On the battlefield, the Grand Union flag's similarity to British naval flags caused confusion. American and British vessels sometimes mistook each other's identity, leading to dangerous situations where friends might fire on friends, or enemies might approach too closely before being identified. 4. Psychological impact. Perhaps most importantly, Americans needed a psychological break from Britain. As long as they flew a flag containing British symbols, they remained mentally tied to their former identity as British subjects. True independence required not just political separation, but psychological and symbolic separation. The transition period, January-June 1777, the period from Independence Day. 1776 through June 1777 saw confusion about American flags. Various solutions. Different military units and naval vessels adopted different approaches. Some continued using the Grand Union flag, arguing it remained the official flag. Some modified the Grand Union flag, removing the Union Jack and replacing it with various American symbols. Some used state flags or regimental colors. Some created entirely new designs. The need for official action. This confusion created practical problems. American forces couldn't always identify each other. Foreign powers didn't know what flag represented American authority. The lack of a unified symbol undermined claims of national unity. Military operations suffered from inconsistent identification. By spring 1777, Congress recognized the need for official action. The time had come to create a genuinely American flag one that rejected British symbols entirely and represented the new nation's independent identity. Third, the birth of the Stars and Stripes, the Flag Act of June 14, 1777. The Congressional Resolution, creating America's true flag. On June 14, 1777, a date now celebrated annually as Flag Day, the Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, passed one of the briefest but most consequential resolutions in American history. Resolved that the flag of the 13 United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. This single sentence, consisting of just 31 words, created one of the world's most enduring and recognizable symbols. Yet in its very brevity lay both genius and problem. The resolution specified what the flag should contain, but not how those elements should be arranged, leading to extraordinary diversity in early American flag designs. The elements, what the resolution specified. 13 stripes, alternate red and white. The stripes continued from the Grand Union flag, but now they stood alone as the primary element of the flag, rather than as an addition to British symbols. The resolution specified number, exactly 13 stripes. Colors, alternating red and white, but not which color should be at top and bottom. Orientation, horizontal, implied, but not stated. Width, not specified. Proportions, not specified. The Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field. The stars replaced the British Union Jack, creating a distinctly American canton. The resolution specified number, 13 stars, color, white, field, blue, but not the shade. Arrangement, not specified. This would lead to enormous variety. Star points, not specified. 5-pointed stars became standard, but 6-pointed stars also appeared. Size, not specified. Representing a new constellation. This phrase carried profound symbolism. A new constellation suggested America was creating something entirely new in human history. A new pattern of government, society, and human possibility. The stars implied that America was guided by divine providence. Stars traditionally symbolized divine guidance. The constellation metaphor suggested unity. Separate states, stars, forming a single recognizable pattern. The imagery evoked classical traditions. Constellations were named by ancient Greeks and Romans, while asserting American novelty. What the resolution omitted: the freedom that created chaos. The Flag Act's brevity created remarkable freedom for flag makers, but also considerable confusion. Unspecified elements. Lead to 1 star arrangement. How should 13 stars be arranged? In a circle? In rows? In some pattern representing colonies' geographic relationships? Randomly? 2. Flag proportions. What should be the flag's overall shape? The ratio of width to height, hoist to fly, was not specified. This affected the flag's appearance significantly. 3. Canton size. How large should the blue field containing stars be? Should it cover 1/4 of the flag? 1:3? Some other proportion? 4. Colors. What specific shades should be used? Red could range from bright scarlet to dark crimson. White might be pure white or cream-colored. Blue could be anything from light sky blue to dark navy blue. 5. Star design. How many points should stars have? 5-pointed stars, pentagrams, were most common. But 6-pointed stars, hexagrams, also appeared. A few flags even used 8-pointed stars. Stripe order. Should the top stripe be red or white? Most early flags had red at top, but some had white. This wasn't standardized until much later. The result was that no 2 early American flags looked exactly alike. Each flag maker interpreted the resolution according to their own aesthetic sense, available materials, and understanding of what was appropriate. The Betsy Ross legend, America's most famous and disputed flag story. No discussion of the first American flag is complete without addressing the Betsy Ross legend, one of America's most cherished patriotic stories, and also one of its most historically controversial. The legend. According to family tradition, in June 1776, a year before the Flag Act, General George Washington, along with George Ross and Robert Morris, members of Congress, visited Philadelphia seamstress Betsy Ross and asked her to create a flag for the new nation based on a rough design Washington had sketched. The story continues that Betsy suggested changes to Washington's design. Washington's original sketch supposedly showed 6-pointed stars. Betsy demonstrated that 5-pointed stars were easier to make. She folded fabric and cut a 5-pointed star with a single scissors cut. a skill that impressed Washington. Washington accepted her suggestion, and Betsy sewed the first American flag. The flag she created featured 13 stars in a circle, now known as the Betsy Ross design. The historical problems. Historians have subjected this story to intense scrutiny, and serious problems emerge. 1. Source issues. The story didn't appear publicly until 1870 and 94 years after the supposed event. It was first told by William Canby, Betsy Ross's grandson, who claimed to have heard it from his grandmother when he was a child. No contemporary documentation from 1776 supports the story. No mention appears in Washington's letters, diary, or papers. No congressional records reference Betsy Ross or a flag commission. 2. Chronological problems. The legend places the visit in June 1776, a year before. Congress actually adopted the Stars and Stripes flag in June 1777. In June 1776, Congress hadn't yet decided on a national flag design. Why would Washington commission a flag before Congress authorized one? 3. Washington's whereabouts. In June 1776, Washington was primarily in New York, preparing defenses against expected British attack. While he briefly visited Philadelphia during the period, coordinating a flag design seems unlikely given military pressures. No documentation places Washington, Ross, and Morris together for such a meeting. Lack of corroboration. If Betsy Ross made the first American flag, it was surely a significant event. Yet no contemporary newspapers, letters, or diaries mention it. Congress's official flag act makes no reference to Ross or any specific design already created, what we know for certain. Despite the legend's problems, some facts are clear. Betsy Ross was real. Elizabeth Griscom Ross, 1752-1836, was indeed a Philadelphia upholsterer and seamstress. She made flags. Records confirm she produced flags for the Pennsylvania Navy in 1777. She knew relevant people. Her late husband's uncle was George Ross, mentioned in the legend, who was a member of Congress. The family believed the story. Multiple descendants testified to the story's truthfulness, though they heard it second or third hand. Possible explanations. Historians have proposed several interpretations. Theory 1. Complete fabrication. The story was invented decades later for commercial or patriotic purposes. It provided an appealing narrative of a founding moment. It gave ordinary Americans, represented by a working-class seamstress, a role in creating the nation. Theory 2. Grain of truth. Perhaps Betsy Ross did make flags. We know she did. Perhaps she made one of the early Stars and Stripes flags. Quite possible. Over time, family memory elevated this to made the first flag. Details about Washington's visit were added to give the story historical weight. Theory 3. Confused chronology. Perhaps something resembling the story happened, but not in 1776. Maybe in 1777 or later, Washington or other officials did commission a flag from Ross. Family memory confused the dates,